as I mentioned last time, characters in John invite readers to imagine how they would respond to Jesus in similar situations. And especially when a reader engages or reads about a character who has no name. So the nameless characters become these sort of empty seats into whom the readers can insert themselves, as Sandra Schneider says. So we are clearly invited to identify with Seldonius, with the man born blind. And I want to do a quick character analysis of Seldonius. He has been described by commentators and character analyzers and scholars as obedient. He does what Jesus tells him to do. Open-minded, faithful to his experience. He keeps going back and repeating his experience and not necessarily being influenced by other people's opinions. He says, this is what happened to me, and I'm just going to be true to what happened to me. And he's also courageous, mostly by being true to his experience, even though he is sort of being threatened by the authorities, and he ends up being expelled by the authorities. And he exhibits a sane agnosticism. There's one point where he says, I don't know. He's obviously not evil because he was effective in healing me, but I can't really say that much more. He has a keen sense of irony, so much so that he gets the authorities a little annoyed at him. They start to revile him because he's saying, I've already told you a couple times, were you not listening to me? Do you want to be his disciple? And he also has a clever tactfulness in his retelling of the healing to the Pharisees. So he retells this healing several times. The first time he shares it with the neighbors and he goes into some detail. But the third time he simply says, he put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Now what does he leave out in that very short retelling? What did he not mention? So we actually read John 5 this afternoon at Ann Pearson's house, and it was dealing with the same issue of a healing on the Sabbath, and that's what got Jesus in a lot of trouble with the Jewish authorities, because he was healing on the Sabbath. And it seems likely that at the time of Jesus, the Pharisees were coming to the conclusion that the Torah prohibited all healings on the Sabbath unless life was in danger. And medications at that time often involved the grinding together of herbs. And because grinding was considered work, it was forbidden on the Sabbath. Furthermore, healing often involved applying ointments or anointing, just like we do as one of our sacraments, unction. And according to the Mishnah, it is considered better to break one Sabbath in order to save someone's life in order for that person to observe many more Sabbaths. So clearly there was a variety of opinion at the time regarding what constituted work on the Sabbath. And this diversity of opinion led to heated argument and division, especially in the context of Sabbath healings, as we see here, and they were divided. But he leaves out here this anointing. He said he made mud. So first of all, if you're making mud, an ointment, that's going to involve some work. It's going to probably involve more than just spitting. He spits and he probably has to do some manipulation of the earth and saliva. So that constitutes work in the opinion of many of the Pharisees and Jewish authorities at the time. And then he also leaves out what Jesus told him to do. Go wash. And that's exactly what Jesus was in trouble for doing with the paralytic man in John 5, when he says, take up your mat and walk. So that's telling him to do work. And this is also telling him to do work. So at this point, it seems like Seldonius is kind of aware that, okay, they are out to really get him. I'm going to be truthful, but I'm going to not necessarily tell the entire detailed truth. He put mud on my eyes. That's sort of a grayer area around whether or not that involves work. Then I washed, and now I see. He didn't tell me to wash. I'm not saying he told me to wash. I'm not saying he didn't tell me to wash. I'm just saying I washed and now I see. So that's this clever tactfulness in his retelling. So he possesses what James Allison in the book Knowing Jesus calls the intelligence of the victim. Now, I explain what the intelligence of the victim is on your handout. The intelligence of the victim, and it's not necessarily possessed by the victim himself or herself, but it's an intelligence regarding this victim-producing process or system. It's an awareness of the innocence of the accused victim. Remember, that's what I talked about last time, that the day is the reality that is informed by the innocence of the victim. It's an awareness of the innocence of the accused victim, whom God seeks to liberate, and the willingness to side with the accused victim, even if that means becoming a victim as well. So when we see the scapegoating mechanism at work, we're teaming up against, Bob Hines isn't here with us, but Bob Hines, I guess he felt too expelled. He was tired of being scapegoated. We all gather around Bob Hines, and if I stand up and say, hold on, let's not pick on him, I'm making myself vulnerable. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing often in John as well. In John 8, when people are gathering around a woman caught in adultery, and people are ready to throw stones, he steps in between and says, hold on, wait up. Let's not throw stones yet. He who is without sin throw the first stone. He is putting himself in the breach and making himself vulnerable. So that's a way to exhibit the intelligence of the victim. And so Celadonius is doing this in his own way. By starting to protect Jesus, he's actually making himself vulnerable. And that's actually different than what the paralytic does in John 5. And I keep bringing this up because we just talked about this morning, and if you're not familiar with it, that's okay. But it's meant to be read sort of in parallel. The paralytic in John 5 goes in sort of the opposite direction. Jesus approaches him and says, do you want to be made well? And he actually just starts blaming other people. He says, well, he doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He says, everybody keeps getting in my way. Every time I try to approach the pool of Bethzatha to be healed, everybody just gets in my way. And then Jesus gives him another opportunity. Take up your mat and walk. And he does. And then the Jewish people approach him and they say, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm not going to take any responsibility. It was this Jesus guy who made me do this. So he starts blaming Jesus, and he's not aware that Jesus might be threatened by these authorities. And he's not willing to be a little bit more subtle in his retelling of the events, just like Celadonius is. He's not lying. He's just trying to protect the accused, who he believes is innocent. Does that make sense? So he defends the accused victim and risks victimhood in the process. So just like we looked at the symbols of day and night and light last time, now we have a new set of symbols. And as we talked about last time, we had the symbols of the day and the night, and we were trying to discover or identify a referent for those symbols. What do they represent? What do they render present? What transcendent mystery do they render present? The metaphors, we don't have to identify their referent because they're already there. So what was the light? Remember we had day, which was a reality informed by the innocence of the victim. The night, which was a reality that is blind to the innocence of the victim, really. And then the light is what? Night is coming when no one can work. We got to be about the work of the one who sent me while it is day. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So Jesus is the light that changes the realities of both the day and the night and then subverts that dichotomy. So we have that all throughout these sets of symbols and images. So last time we had day, night, these sort of symbols in opposition, creating that dichotomy. Dichotomy subverted by the light, which embraces and transforms them both. embraces and transforms both the victim and the victimizer. Remember this? Now, this just continues, but the symbols change and they sort of deepen our understanding of this relationship, this dynamic. Here, we have new symbols, and they're within the narrative itself, within what we call the interrogation narrative. We have blindness, we have vision. Those are the symbols. And then the metaphor is the judge. And who is the judge? Jesus. And remember, last time we talked about how much light is connected with judgment. And again, the judge is going to subvert that dichotomy of vision and blindness by embracing both those who are blind and those who see. And this gets a little tricky because it's just deeply ironic. And the author of John loves irony, and he's having fun. I mean, Pam and Paul did a great job in capturing sort of the wit and the sort of rapport that was, or not rapport, but the puns and the irony that was going on between these characters. It's tricky because there's physical blindness and then there's the symbol of what's basically spiritual blindness. So I tried to come up with a graph here, and this is all really based on how Jesus sums it all up. He says, I came into this world for judgment. Okay, so he is saying, I am the judge. That's the metaphor. The judge is Jesus. So that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Okay, so again, I am using the anthropological tale as my key for interpreting the symbols. Remember all of this? The anthropological tale, which is basically this tale of a prophet coming to dismantle the scapegoat mechanism. So using the anthropological tale as my key for interpreting these symbols, I argue that vision is a symbol of what actually James Allison, in Knowing Jesus, calls the open-eyed freedom of someone with the intelligence of the victim. Someone who is so aware of God's vivacity and this life that transcends all these systems of oppression and violence, that he or she lives differently, lives beyond these systems, and is aware that he or she may be martyred as a result. Is not seeking martyrdom, but is aware that this could easily happen because with the intelligence of the victim, you're going to be standing up for those who are wrongfully accused, and you'll be vulnerable yourself. So it's this open-eyed freedom. That's what vision is, or what the symbol of vision represents. That's the intelligence of the victim. Now, it gets a little tricky because there's the physical experience of blindness, and that's in somebody in need of new vision. And the invitation for someone who thinks they can see is to have that open-eyed freedom. So the physical experience of blindness, that is Celadonius. That is the man born blind. He's in need of new physical vision. And then he gets that new vision physically and spiritually. That's the key. He gets both physical vision and spiritual vision, and that spiritual vision is the open-eyed freedom, which is the intelligence of the victim. And then starting on the bottom right-hand side, we have people with the physical experience of vision, the Pharisees, the disciples, the interrogators, those who think that they can see already, convinced that their vision is clear, but they are actually blinded by what is called the veil of, what James Allison calls the veil of self-delusion, which is caught up in this system of rivalry and scapegoating. Helen?
In the hymn it says, I was blind, but now I can see.
Isn't that great that we just sang Amazing Grace last Sunday?
Yeah.
That's based on, I mean, the NRC is trying to be really faithful to the Greek, but I think in NIV and King James, it's I once was blind, but now I see. That's based on the words of Celadonius, right? And that means it's got double meanings. I once was physically blind, but now I see both physically and spiritually. And his physical vision comes to him right away, but the spiritual vision, you can see that progress. You see him first saying Jesus is a prophet, and then he says Jesus is the prophet, and then he comes to see Jesus as the Son of Man, and he worships Jesus. And he's actually the only character in the Gospel of John to worship Jesus. Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," at the way end after he's resurrected, but he's the only one where the Gospel actually says he worshipped him. So he is really an ideal disciple. Okay, so that's the symbols of blindness and vision. And then I sum up my interpretation by paraphrasing what Jesus says, which I have not on the slide but in your handout, right under the table. Jesus says, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who suffer from blindness may not only receive physical vision, but also be empowered by the open-eyed freedom that risks victimhood in defense of other victims. I also came so that those who believe that they can clearly see will come to realize that their vision is in fact veiled and blinded by their compulsion to blame." Is that making sense? Now, I kept saying this in my dissertation. I'm not arguing that the historical Jesus said all of this. The more I think about it, the more I think that is exactly what he's saying. But I am arguing that this is what the textual Jesus is saying. When I read and experience and read prayerfully the textual Jesus in light of the anthropological tale. Okay?